In today's video, we're going to be looking into the 10 most common 3D printing mistakes that people make.
One of the first mistakes I made when I was 3D printing was not enabling the auto bed leveling and filament calibration tests at the beginning of every print. This would lead to a lot of my prints failing, and when I found out it was the cause and I fixed it, it saved me a lot of filament. So I would highly recommend that you keep it enabled in order to not have this problem happen to you.
A common mistake a lot of people make is not understanding how strong their print needs to be and optimizing for that strength. So for example, let's say you want to make a rock climbing hangboard that you hang off of and put all your weight on. You're going to need to increase the strength. How do you increase strength? You increase the infill percentage and the type of infill that you use. So for the rock climbing hangboard, I would probably recommend 60 to 80% infill. But let's say you're going to be doing something more basic, like a soap holder, that really doesn't need that much strength. You can get away with the default settings, the 15% infill.
Another mistake I see a lot of people make in 3D printing is that they forget that speed and precision are inverses. As in, if you try to print something that's meant to be very precise at a fast speed, it's not going to come out as precise. So when you're printing, it's important to keep that in mind.
Another important thing that you need to do so you could actually 3D print better is to 3D model with 3D printing in mind. To show you what I mean, I'm going to give you the example of my skee ball design. So if I would have printed this normally just like this, it would have required supports here and in each of these holes. However, what I ended up doing is that I ended up splitting this piece in half right here. This little piece right here, I ended up taking it off and printing it as a separate piece and gluing it separately, so that I could avoid all these overhang supports and not need supports for some of these holes. So whenever you're 3D modeling, remember that you're going to eventually 3D print it. So always make changes to your 3D model that will help you reduce the waste in 3D printing.
Another common mistake in 3D printing is that people don't store their filaments properly. If you're not going to be able to use a filament for a while, or you have a material like TPU, it's probably a good idea to invest in vacuum seal bags or like a little vacuum seal pump so that the next time you use that spool, it won't be as damaged as if you had just left it out and it got humid. On Bambu Lab, there's also some people that printed an AMS Lite filament enclosure, which makes it a lot easier to store filament spools while still keeping them on your AMS Lite.
Another mistake a lot of people make is that they're afraid to try out new, more complicated filaments. A big one being TPU. For those of you guys who don't know, TPU is kind of like a rubberish material that you print out and it's very flexible. And it's a really cool filament, but so many people are very afraid to try it out. Especially if you have a Bambu Lab A1, you should never be afraid of printing TPU. It's so simple. You literally just click TPU and all the settings are preset for you and you can print out TPU perfectly. Remember, 3D printing is all about trial and error. It's all about learning. So if a couple prints fail, that's okay. You're only losing a couple cents. But in the long run, you're learning how to use that filament properly.
Threading is one of the most important skills for 3D printing, and Michael and I have learned a lot in our 3D printing journey about threading. For smaller threads, it's generally a good idea to print at 50% speeds, and for bigger threads, try and recreate the thread on a smaller model to save filament in case it's not the right thread size.
This next tip might be the most important tip of the entire video, and it's how you orientate your prints in the slicer. So if you've been playing around with the slicer for a little bit, you probably see there's many ways to orientate a print. You can print it like this, or like this, or like this, or in any way you please. But obviously, the way you orientate it is actually going to help you with strength and the time it takes to print. When you print something like this, it's called printing along the layer lines. And when you print something like this, it's called printing against the layer lines. Basically what you got to know is that this is bad and this is good. And I was going to show you how bad it was to print like this because it really makes the print a lot weaker, but it broke off camera, proving how bad it actually is to print. On top of that, it actually takes a lot longer to print something along the layer lines than against the layer lines. In this case, when I printed this print only took me 30 minutes to print, and this one took me 55 minutes to print.
If you live in a very humid place, it's also common to see filaments get damaged a lot easier because humidity damages filaments, as we mentioned with the storage spools. And if you have no way around this, it's probably a good idea to buy an enclosure or maybe get a fan and have it blow on the machine. Because if not, you'll have a lot of filaments that you won't be able to use completely because they'll get damaged.
This final piece of advice is for those of you guys who have a Bambu Lab printer with the AMS system. And if you print something with multi-material separately on different plates, it'll actually save you a ton of filament, because for some reason, whenever you print out like something like this on the same plate that's different colors, it'll end up building like this little block that is the same height as the end print. But it actually ends up wasting a lot of filament, and it's unnecessary filament that you could just save by printing on another plate.
As always, thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you guys next week.